Forged in fire, found in gold. Part 1. The spark before the flame. Chapter 1. Steel and light. The acetylene torch hissed like a living thing. ZARA Henderson lowered her welding helmet and let the world go dark except for the blue-white star blooming at the tip of her torch. In that darkness, with the roar of fire filling her ears and the smell of hot metal rising around her like incense, she was the most herself she had ever been. No voices. No accusations. No outstretched hands belonging to people who called themselves family. Just steel. Just light. Just her. She was building a heron. It stood 4 feet tall already, its long neck arching from a base of reclaimed railroad iron she'd found at a salvage yard in Decatur. The wings were layered sheets of copper she'd hammered thin herself, each feather individual, each edge beveled to catch light differently depending on the hour. When the afternoon sun came through the tall windows of the space she was renting, her space, the space she paid for with her own money and her own name on the lease, those wings turned the color of fire. The color of her skin, she thought sometimes. Copper. Golden. Burning. She lifted her helmet and inspected the weld at the base of the left wing where it joined the body. Clean. Almost invisible. She allowed herself a small smile. Almost good enough. She set the torch aside and picked up her angle grinder, letting the grinding wheel smooth the seam until the metal looked like it had always been one piece, like the heron had simply arrived in the world this way, complete, whole, unbothered by the violence of its own creation. Her phone buzzed on the workbench beside her thermos. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She set down the grinder. If it's Mama's number, I swear to God. It wasn't. It was Marcus, her attorney, which was almost as alarming. She pulled off her gloves and answered. Tell me something good, Marcus. The judge signed the final order this morning. His voice was careful, the way people's voices got when they were delivering news that was bigger than they knew how to hand you gently. It's done, Zara. The case is closed. The financial abuse finding stands. The restitution judgment stands. All of it. She sat down on her stool. The heron watched her with its unfinished eye, a socket she hadn't yet filled with the amber glass marble she'd chosen for it. Zara? You still there? I'm here. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I'm here. Thank you, Marcus. Really. You did the hard part. I just filed the paperwork. She hung up and sat for a long moment in the silence of her studio. Outside, Atlanta traffic hummed its indifferent song. A pigeon landed on the windowsill, regarded her, and left. 3 months ago, she had walked out of her mother's house for the last time. She had sat in her car in the driveway with 37 years of her life behind her, her childhood bedroom, her grandmother's cast iron skillet that her mother had refused to give back. The particular way Sunday mornings smelled in that house even when everything inside them was wrong, and she had driven away. She had not gone back. She had filed her case. She had documented 14 years of loans that became gifts by force, of credit cards opened in her name without consent, of paychecks that became family funds the moment they cleared. She had the receipts because she was a welder and welders understood that the integrity of a structure depended on documentation. You couldn't just believe a joint was sound. You had to test it. You had to have proof. The proof had been damning. The victory felt nothing like she'd imagined it would. She'd thought it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like the morning after a long illness, weak and quiet, and not quite sure what to do with all that new silence. She looked at the heron. Finish the damn bird, she told herself. Then worry about everything else. She picked up her grinder. The email arrived 3 days later. She almost deleted it because the subject line read commission inquiry, multiple pieces, and she'd been getting a lot of those lately, mostly from interior designers who wanted her to produce the same piece over and over in different sizes, which was the thing she hated most in the world. But something made her open it. Miss Henderson. My name is Drew James. I'm the founder and CEO of James Security Group, which is relocating its Southeast regional headquarters to Atlanta this spring. I've been following your work for approximately 8 months, specifically the Iron Forest installation you created for the Pemberton Gallery and the commission pieces you completed for the Aldrich Hotel lobby. I have several office buildings and a private residence that I believe would be significantly improved by your work. I'm not interested in reproductions. I want original pieces that respond to specific spaces. I understand that's how you prefer to work. I'd like to schedule a site visit at your convenience. I'm happy to come to your studio first if you'd prefer to meet on your ground. Drew James. Zara read it twice. He's done his research, she noted. The Pemberton installation had been her most ambitious piece, 47 individual iron trees, none taller than 3 feet, arranged in a pattern that from ground level looked random, but from the building's mezzanine resolved into the shape of a woman's face. She had never explained that to the gallery. She'd wanted people to find it themselves. Most never did. He said he's been following my work for 8 months. She tried not to be flattered and mostly failed. She Googled him. James Security Group had revenues that made her quietly set down her coffee mug. Drew James himself was 42, former military. She could tell by the posture in the single professional headshot that came up, the way he stood like he was expecting the ground to move and had already decided what to do about it. The photo was a few years old and taken from far enough away that she couldn't get a clear read on his face. But the build was unmistakable. The man was large in the way that certain things were large old-growth trees, cathedral doorways. Large in a way that seemed architectural rather than simply physical. She wrote back. Mr. James, studio visits are by appointment only. I have availability Thursday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. The address is below. I should tell you up front, I don't do commissions on a quick timeline, and I don't take creative direction from clients. If you want something that responds to your space, you'll need to trust me to respond to it my way. If that works for you, Thursday is fine. ZARA Henderson. She almost softened it. Then she left it exactly as it was. She was done softening things to make other people comfortable. His reply came within 20 minutes. Thursday at 10. I'll bring coffee. How do you take it? She stared at the screen. Black, she typed. No sugar. Chapter 2. Thursday at 10. She told herself she hadn't dressed up. She was wearing her good work overalls, the deep indigo ones without any burn holes, paired with a fitted black thermal underneath because the studio ran cold in the mornings. She'd freshened the ends of her locks with shea butter the night before, and they hung to her waist in thick, rope-like spirals that she'd half pinned back from her face with a copper clip she'd forged herself. The clip was shaped like a feather. Work clothes, she told herself. Perfectly normal work clothes. At 9:58, she heard a car in the lot outside and looked through the tall windows to see a slate gray Range Rover park with the kind of precision that suggested the driver took parking seriously. She watched the door open. He unfolded from the vehicle the way tall people had to in stages, leading with one long leg, and then the rest of him following, and the rest of him was considerable. He was wearing dark slacks and a charcoal wool coat that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body, because it probably had. He was bald, the kind of bald that was clearly a choice, his scalp smooth and gleaming in the thin winter light. A small, precise mustache sat above his mouth like punctuation. He was holding 2 coffee cups. He looked up at the building, found the right door, and walked toward it with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never been late in his life and saw no reason to start. ZARA stepped back from the window. Oh, she thought, very quietly. Oh, that's not what I was expecting. She smoothed her hands down the front of her overalls, a gesture she immediately resented, and went to open the door. He was taller than she'd calculated from the photo. Standing in her doorway, Drew James had to tilt his head slightly to clear the frame, and when he straightened on the other side of the threshold, he seemed to fill the room the way a piece of large sculpture did, not blocking the space so much as organizing it around himself. The overhead lights caught the deep copper of his skin, and she registered in one helpless, clinical second that he was beautiful in the specific way that well-forged metal was beautiful, hard and warm, and formed by considerable heat. His eyes were dark brown and took her in with an attention that was direct without being rude. He extended one of the coffee cups. Miss Henderson. His voice was exactly what the width of his chest promised, low and resonant, a cello note played with a heavy bow. Thank you for seeing me. She took the cup. You're on time. Always. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. More like the idea of one. Your studio is remarkable from the outside. That heron in the window, is that finished or in progress? In progress. She stepped back to let him fully in, watching his face as he turned and saw the space properly for the first time. She loved watching people see her studio for the first time. It was a kind of test she'd never announced. He passed it. He didn't make a sound for a long moment. He turned slowly, taking in the iron forest section she was building along the south wall, the copper heron on its stand by the window, the welding stations with their organized chaos of tools, the sketches pinned to a corkboard that ran the length of the east wall. Hundreds of them, charcoal and ink, ideas she'd had and half had and not yet had. He looked at all of it the way you looked at something you intended to understand, not just see. You work alone? He asked. Yes. All of this is one person. It wasn't quite a question. She answered it anyway. All of it. He looked at her then, and she felt the directness of it like a physical thing, not uncomfortable exactly, but present. Impossible to miss. I've seen a lot of art, he said. I've bought a lot of art. I want to be straightforward with you, Miss Henderson. I'm not interested in decoration. I want work that means something in a space. Something people have to stop and actually look at. Then you're looking for the right person. She took a sip of her coffee. It was from the good place on Ponce, which meant he'd either researched her neighborhood or knew Atlanta. What spaces are we talking about? He reached into his coat and produced a slim folder, actual printed photographs of spaces, which she appreciated. People who brought real photographs to these meetings understood that she needed to feel the dimensions of a room, not squint at a phone screen. She spread them on her workbench and bent over them, her locks falling forward over her shoulder. She could feel him standing beside her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth coming off him, which was considerable and slightly unreasonable given that they were standing in a cold studio. She focused on the photographs. The headquarters building was glass and exposed concrete, very clean lines, a lobby that was crying out for something organic. His private residence, she looked at those photos twice, was a contemporary craftsman on what appeared to be substantial property, with a great room that had 15-foot ceilings and a wall of windows looking onto a private woods. The residence is new, she asked. Closes in 6 weeks. You bought a house before you moved here? I knew I was coming. There was no reason to wait. He said it matter-of-factly, like this was how decisions worked when you made them properly. She glanced up at him. Up was the operative word. He had a full foot and a half on her, and standing this close to him, the scale of it was more apparent. She was not a woman who felt small. But she felt vertical, she thought. She felt aware of verticality in a way that was new. The lobby I can see clearly, she said, returning to the photographs. Something kinetic. Something with movement implied in static metal. The residence, she tapped the photo of the great room. I'd need to see it in person. The light coming off those woods is going to change everything. I was hoping you'd say that. He turned toward her. Would you be willing to do a site visit? That's how I work. She straightened. I should be clear about my timeline and terms. I take on 2 commissions at a time maximum. I'm currently finishing the heron and have 1 other piece in progress. I can begin design work on your lobby piece in approximately 6 weeks. The residence is longer. That kind of space needs more time. I'm not in a hurry, he said. I want it right. She studied him for a moment, the stillness of him, the way he didn't fidget or rush or try to fill the silence with reassurance. Most clients couldn't stand silence. They interpreted it as hesitation and started negotiating preemptively. Drew James stood in her silence like he lived there. Interesting, she thought. Pricing, she said. Name it. She named it. She named it at the high end of her range, the number she usually only said with an internal wince, waiting for the counter. He nodded once. Done. I'll have my assistant send over a contract template for your review. Change anything you need to. She blinked. You carry a contract template to first meetings? I carry it in my phone. I've been doing my due diligence on you for 8 months. I knew I wanted to work with you before I walked in. A pause. I can be patient when I know what I'm waiting for. The words landed with a weight that she was almost sure was just business. Almost. She picked up her coffee. Let me show you what I'm working on. Chapter 3, What She Carried. She showed him the heron. She showed him the sketches on the east wall and walked him through the iron forest concept, explaining the hidden image, the woman's face, that you couldn't see until you were above it. He looked at the mezzanine-level photograph she had from the Pemberton installation and was quiet for a full minute. How many people found it, he asked. 14, as far as I know. The gallery kept a little book. 14 out of how many visitors? The show ran for 3 months. Thousands. That's not failure, he said. That's a gift for the people paying attention. She looked at him sideways. That's exactly what I've always thought. Something moved between them in the air, quick and warm, like the moment before a weld takes. She turned back to the sketches. She did not think about the way he'd said it, the quiet certainty, like he'd been thinking it for years and had simply been waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. She did not think about the fact that he had found, in one sentence, the defense of her philosophy that she had never quite been able to articulate, even to herself. She was too busy surviving the last 3 months to have room for things like this. Bounce checks with your name on them and you didn't even know the accounts existed. Phone calls at midnight demanding rent money for a house you haven't lived in for 9 years. Your bonus, the big one, the one you'd been working toward for 3 years, gone in a week because you answered the phone and said yes, because you'd been trained since childhood that yes was the only safe answer. She had been trained to be consumed. She was only now learning, at 36, what it felt like to take up her own space. She was not going to complicate that learning by thinking too hard about a man she'd met 40 minutes ago. Tell me about the security company, she said. How long have you been running it? He settled onto the stool she gestured to without making it look like a large man trying to fit onto furniture designed for normal humans. 12 years. Started it when I left the army. 3 guys and a van. And now? 14 offices. For 100 employees. We handle corporate security, executive protection, facilities risk assessment. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. His hands were, she noted this purely as a structural observation, exceptionally large, with the kind of deliberate competence in the way he held things that suggested he knew exactly how strong he was and managed it accordingly. I built it to be sustainable. Not fast. Slow and right, she said. Always. He met her eyes. You opened the studio 3 months ago. How do you know that? Your website launch date. Your first Instagram post from this space was in November. A very slight pause. I pay attention to things I'm interested in. The warmth of that sentence moved through her like the heat of her torch, directed, specific, impossible to mistake for ambient temperature. Do not, she told herself firmly. You are a person who is learning to protect yourself. This is a business meeting. The website launched in November, she confirmed, her voice professionally pleasant. The studio lease started in October. I've been designing for years. This is just the first time it's had its own address. Why no? She considered how much to say. With most clients, she would say something clean and minimal. The timing was right. I wanted to invest in my own work. Something that closed the door politely. She didn't know why she said more. Maybe it was the quality of his attention, the sense that he was actually listening rather than waiting for his turn. Because I spent a long time investing in other things that didn't return the investment, she said carefully. And I finally decided to stop. He was quiet for a moment, and she felt him not pushing, felt the deliberate respect of someone who recognized a partial answer and chose not to demand the rest. That takes courage, he said. Redirecting that kind of energy. Or stubbornness. The same thing, pointed in the right direction. She smiled in spite of herself. It was a small smile, controlled, the kind she allowed herself when she couldn't help it. He saw it, and something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not presumptuously. Just a slight easing, like a door unlocking without opening. I should let you get back to work, he said, standing from the stool in one fluid motion that seemed impossible for someone his size. I appreciate your time, Miss Henderson. I'll have the contract template sent over today. Zara, she said. He stilled. You can call me Zara. She held out her hand. We're going to be working together for a while. Miss Henderson seems excessive. He took her hand, and she had registered the size of his hands before, but nothing had prepared her for the experience of her hand inside his, not dwarfed, exactly, more like found. His grip was warm and precise, firm without performing firmness. Zara, he said. Her name in his voice. The cello note of it. The way he said it like it meant something. Drew, she replied, because his hand was still around hers, and she needed to say something that wasn't oh. He released her hand. Picked up his coat from where he'd folded it over a second stool. Turned at the door. The coffee place I got those from, the one on Ponce. Do they have a good lunch menu? She blinked. Sandwiches. Why? I was thinking about the site visit for the headquarters building. If you have availability next week, we could do the walkthrough and then lunch. So you can ask questions without having to be professional about it. She stared at him. That's not I just mean there are things that are hard to ask in a formal setting that might help your design process. He was perfectly composed, perfectly correct in his phrasing, but there was something in his dark eyes that was careful, she thought. Careful in the way of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and wants to be honest about it without pushing. He's telling me something, she realized. And he's doing it in a way that I can choose not to hear if I want to. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. Next Wednesday, she said. I can do the walkthrough at 11. I'll be there. He ducked through the door. She listened to his footsteps on the concrete outside, the Range Rover's engine starting with a sound like something powerful being politely restrained, and then he was gone. She turned back to the heron. The ember glass marble for its eye was sitting in a small dish on her workbench. She picked it up and held it to the light. It was the color of dark honey, warm and golden brown, with a slight flame pattern in its center. She pressed it gently into the heron's socket and stepped back. The bird looked back at her. Don't say a word, she told it. Part 2. Heat and Pressure. Chapter 4. The Weight of What's Beautiful. The headquarters building was in Buckhead, a converted mid-century structure that someone had saved from demolition by the skin of its teeth and rebuilt into something that respected its bones. Zara walked through it with her notebook and her phone camera, making notes and taking photos while Drew walked 2 steps behind her, which she noticed immediately. He was letting her lead the space. Not following subordinately, she could feel his attention moving with hers, tracing the same sight lines, thinking about the same problems. But he kept himself out of her way with the deliberateness of someone who had thought about it. The lobby was everything she'd hoped from the photographs and more. The ceiling was 18 feet, the original terrazzo floors had been restored, and there was a skylight running the length of the reception desk that in the afternoon would throw light across the entire east wall like a moving painting. That skylight, she said. I know, he said. Whatever goes on that east wall has to work with that light moving across it throughout the day. That's what I thought. She looked at him over her shoulder. How long have you been thinking about this building? Since I made the offer on it. He stepped up beside her, tilting his head back to study the skylight. The light fell across his face and the copper-red tones in his skin deepened. He looked like something that should be in a gallery himself, she thought, and then firmly set the thought aside. I don't buy things I haven't thought about. Is that a general philosophy? Yes. She turned back to the wall. I want to see it at different times of day. Is that possible? I'd need access. I'll have a key card made for you today. She blinked. Today. You said you need to see it at different times. If the card's ready today, you can come back tomorrow morning if you want. He looked at her steadily. The building is empty except for construction crew until April. You can come and go as you need to. She stood with that for a moment, the uncomplicated practicality of it, the absence of negotiation. The way he just solved the problem rather than making her make a case for it. She was not used to that. Careful, she told herself, but the warning felt slightly hollow, like something she was saying because she was supposed to, not because she actually believed it. They moved through the rest of the building, 2 conference floors, executive offices on the top level, a private dining room, and she took notes and asked questions, and he answered them without editorializing, without steering her toward the ideas he preferred. He had preferences, she could tell. When he paused slightly before answering something, she recognized it as him choosing to share information rather than direction. An intelligent man, she thought. Intelligent enough to know what he didn't know. Over lunch, the sandwiches were excellent, and the coffee was better. She told him about the Iron Forest. The one at Pemberton? What made you choose the woman's face as the hidden image? She tore the corner off her sandwich. Outside the window, Ponce de Leon was its usual beautiful chaos of pedestrians and bikes, and the particular Atlanta energy that felt like a city perpetually in the middle of becoming itself. It was about invisibility, she said. Women in spaces, public spaces, professional spaces, who are present but not seen. I wanted to make that literal. Make a piece where the face was there the whole time and most people just never looked from the right angle. He was quiet for a moment. The 14 people who found it. Yeah, I wonder what they felt. I got 3 letters. She smiled at her sandwich. 3 actual letters, handwritten, sent to the gallery. All 3 were women. All 3 said some version of the same thing, that they'd been standing in the mezzanine for some other reason and looked down and suddenly saw it and felt. She paused. Felt seen was the word they all used. which is the thing I was going for, but when it actually works, she shook her head. It still surprises me. Drew set his coffee down and looked at her with that steady, direct attention she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things he cared about. You should feel surprised, he said quietly. It means you made something real enough to do what you intended. Not every artist gets there. She looked up at him. The afternoon light was doing something to his face, sharpening the angle of his jaw, deepening the warmth in his skin, and she was suddenly acutely aware that she was sitting across a small table from him and that they had been talking for 90 minutes and that she had not once felt like she needed to be careful with her words. That's the dangerous part, she realized. Not the beauty of him, which was considerable. Not the money or the ease or the way he'd said name it without blinking when she'd named her price. The dangerous part was how easy it was. How simple. Like something her body recognized even though her mind was still cataloging reasons to be cautious. I should get back to the studio, she said. I know. He didn't make it a disappointment. Just an acknowledgement. Thank you for the walkthrough. And for the conversation. It was a business lunch. Yes. He met her eyes. The corner of his mouth. That almost smile. Of course it was. She gathered her bag. He stood when she did, reflexively, without ceremony, the way some men had been raised to do it, and she was 3 steps toward the door before she processed it and had to forcibly prevent herself from turning around to look at him again. Chapter 5. The Delivery. She was in the middle of grinding a weld on Thursday afternoon when she heard someone at the studio door and found a man she didn't recognize holding a flat, tissue-wrapped package approximately the size of a large book. Delivery for ZARA Henderson? From Mr. James? She took the package to her workbench and opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in more tissue, was a book, large format, heavy, the kind that came in a slipcase. Sheila Hicks, Weaving as Metaphor. First edition. She knew because she had looked it up when she'd wanted it 18 months ago and found that first editions were well beyond what she'd been willing to spend on herself at a time when her money had not yet been her own. There was a card tucked inside the front cover. Small, square, cream-colored cardstock with his name printed at the top, old-fashioned and somehow right for him. I happened to find this. I thought of you. D. She stood in her studio holding the book for a long time. I happened to find this. She was not naive enough to believe he had happened to find a first edition. He had looked for it. He had thought about what she would want, something for her work, something beautiful, something that acknowledged what she did as worthy of serious attention, and then he had gone and gotten it. Thoughtful was the most intimate thing a person could be. She had spent years surrounded by people who couldn't remember what she cared about from one conversation to the next, who were interested in her resources rather than her inner life. The people who were supposed to love her. She set the book down on the workbench very carefully. She picked up her phone. The book is extraordinary. You didn't have to do that. His reply came in minutes. I know. I wanted to. How's the heron? She photographed the heron and sent it without thinking. 3 bubbles. Then, the eye is perfect. What made you choose that color? She leaned against the workbench. It's the color light turns when it comes through fall leaves, she typed. Right before they go fully amber. That moment where it's still warm, but you know it's changing. A pause. Then, I'm going to think about that every time I see amber glass for the rest of my life. She smiled at her phone like a complete fool. Set it face down on the workbench. Picked up her angle grinder. Do not, she told herself, and the instruction had less force every time she gave it. Chapter 6. Voltage. She went to the headquarters building on a Tuesday morning before 6, when the light was coming in low and slant from the east, and the construction crew hadn't arrived yet, and the lobby was entirely hers. She sat on the terrazzo floor directly below the skylight with her notebook and a thermos of coffee and watched the light move for 2 hours. She sketched without stopping, shapes and concepts flowing from the pencil in a way that only happened when she was alone and unhurried, when the work was leading and she was following. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the elevator until the doors opened. Drew came through them in running clothes, a long-sleeved base layer and dark pants, his face slightly flushed with cold, breathing easily the way people breathed easily when they'd covered serious distance. He stopped when he saw her on the floor. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I didn't know you were in the building. I used to run past this block. Now I can run to it. He looked at her notebook. I'll leave you alone. You don't, she paused. Reconsidered. You can stay. If you're quiet. He got himself a cup of water from the contractor's cooler at the far end of the lobby and sat against the opposite wall, knees up, forearms resting on them. He was quiet. It was remarkable, she thought, sketching how quiet he was. The quality of his silence was different from absence. It was more like the silence of a building well built, where nothing creaked or complained, where all the load was properly distributed. She sketched for another 40 minutes. He didn't speak, didn't check his phone, didn't shift restlessly. When the construction crew began to arrive and the building filled with sound, she capped her pencil and looked across the lobby at him. I've got it, she said. Tell me. A canopy. Not a single piece, a system of 40 to 60 individual elements suspended from the ceiling at varying heights, trailing down toward the floor like, she struggled for the word. Like light made solid. Like the moment of sunrise frozen. Each element different, but from below they read as one continuous gesture. She stood, moving to the center of the lobby, tilting her head back. When the skylight hits in the morning, it'll ignite the whole thing. By afternoon it'll be shadowed and quiet. Same piece, completely different at every hour. He had stood while she talked and crossed the lobby toward her, and she was too caught up in the vision to track his approach until he was standing beside her looking up at the same ceiling she was looking at. You can see it, can't you? She said. Tell me you can see it. I can see it. His voice was very close. Quiet. Completely. She lowered her gaze and found that he was looking at her rather than the ceiling, had possibly been looking at her the entire time she was talking, and the expression on his face was careful, she thought, but the word was dissolving. He was looking at her the way you looked at the thing you'd come for. She held his gaze for 3 seconds, 4, the lobby soundtracked by power tools starting up and the distant shout of workers, and then she took a step back, not a retreat exactly, more like giving herself room to breathe, and looked down at her notebook. I need to do materials cost estimates, she said. And structural math for the suspension system. Of course. His voice was steady, unhurried. Breakfast? I know a place. She looked up at him. You just ran. I run 6 days a week. I'm not tired. She thought about saying no. She thought about the firm, protective scaffolding she'd been building around herself for 3 months, the boundaries she'd fought to establish, the quiet, ordinary miracle of a life that was finally, simply hers. Then she thought about 2 hours of him sitting against the opposite wall, quiet and patient, just because she'd said she needed quiet. Give me 20 minutes to send these sketches to myself, she said. And I need to change out of my floor clothes. The corner of his mouth. The almost smile that she was starting to map the geography of. 20 minutes, he said. Part 3, The Making and the Making Known. Chapter 7, What She Won't Say. Breakfast became a pattern. It wasn't planned. Or rather, it was planned by him, she gradually realized, in his careful, patient, unhurried way. He happened to be at the headquarters building on the mornings she came to observe the light. He happened to know where the good breakfast was in every part of the city. He happened, repeatedly, to have exactly the right amount of time before his first meeting. He was not subtle. But he was not pressuring either. Every invitation had an exit built in. Every plan left room for her to redirect it. She stopped pretending she didn't notice how thoughtful it was. How do you know about this place? She asked one morning, in a tiny Ethiopian restaurant in East Atlanta where the injera was made fresh every morning and the coffee ceremony was conducted with full formality. My executive assistant is from Addis Ababa. He was watching the proprietor, an elderly woman in an embroidered dress, grind the roasted beans. She told me about it on my 3rd day in Atlanta. Said if I didn't go I was insulting the city. Smart woman. The smartest person on my team. He accepted the small ceramic cup of coffee and held it correctly, something he'd clearly done before. She's been with me for 9 years. Started as a receptionist. You promoted from within. Always, when I can. She turned her cup in her hands. The coffee was extraordinary, earthy, complex, like drinking something that had taken a long time to become itself. Can I ask you something personal? She said. Yes. The directness, the wanting to have lunch and breakfast and visit the building. I want to understand what that is. He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, where you could see a person thinking rather than evading. I'm interested in you, he said. I think you know that. I'm trying to be clear about it without being a pause. Without moving faster than you want to move. I'm aware that I can be a lot. A very slight, self-aware dryness in his voice that surprised her. My size, the company, the intensity. I've been told it's a lot. She studied him. It is a lot. Yes. And you're aware of that. I'm very aware of it. Which is why I'm not pressing. He set his cup down and looked at her directly. I'm interested in you seriously. Not in passing, not casually. If at any point that makes you uncomfortable or feels like too much, I want you to tell me and I'll recalibrate. Recalibrate, she repeated. Back off, he said simply. Give you more space. Whatever you need. She sat with that. Outside, East Atlanta was waking up. A man walked his dog past the window. A bus made its grinding stop and start. A woman jogged with headphones and a red jacket bright against the gray morning. I'm in she chose her words carefully. A transitional place. Some things have happened recently that I'm still processing. I'm not, she paused. I'm not unavailable. But I'm also not entirely arrived at wherever I'm going yet. I understand that. He said it without visible frustration, without the faintly hurt energy of a man whose timeline was being complicated. I'm not asking for anything right now that you're not already giving me. Breakfast, she thought. Conversation. Being seen. She looked down at her coffee. He's asking for this, she realized. This exact thing. Sitting across a table and being honest. That's the ask. It should have been a small thing. Given what she'd been through, the smallness of the ask felt almost radically safe. She was not used to safe. She looked up at him. Tell me something about yourself that isn't on your company website. Something in his face softened, a barely perceptible easing, like a very slightly held breath released. I paint, he said. Badly. I've been trying for 6 years and I'm still not good at it. She blinked. You paint. Watercolor. I think it's because I'm always around concrete and steel. I like the idea of something that can't be controlled. Where the water does what it wants. A slight, rueful expression. The water does what it wants constantly. It has no respect for my intentions. She laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite kind. It came up from somewhere lower and surprised her on the way out. Drew watched it happen with an expression she could only describe as reverent. She stopped laughing and looked at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing." But his voice had gone slightly rougher, and he looked away to pick up his coffee. "That's the first time I've heard you really laugh." The warmth of that sentence sat in her chest for the rest of the morning and well into the afternoon, while she was at her workbench running calculations for the canopy installation. She worked it like a stone in her pocket, turning it over, feeling its edges, trying to decide what it was made of. Chapter 8. Equilibrium. She was grinding a prototype element for the canopy, a single piece, 12 inches long, shaped like a seed pod or a feather or something between the two, when her phone rang and she saw her mother's number. Her hands went still. The grinder went quiet. She watched the number pulse on the screen, 3 rings, 4, and the old responses rose in her body like muscle memory. The shortening of her breath, the tightening across her shoulders, the specific nauseating mixture of guilt and obligation that had governed 20 years of her life. She let it go to voicemail. She put the phone down. She picked up the grinder. She went back to work. Her hands were not quite steady. The weld she'd been planning to make was suddenly not something she trusted herself to do. A weld made with unsteady hands was a bad weld, and she had standards. She put down the grinder and called Marcus instead. She called again, she told him. "Noted. You didn't answer." "No." "Good. The judgment is final, Zara. She can call. Calling isn't in violation of anything. But if she escalates." "I know. You're doing everything right." She hung up and stood in her studio in the specific silence that came after interactions with the past, a silence with a texture to it, gritty and unwelcome. She texted Drew without quite deciding to. "Do you ever have days where winning feels like more work than losing?" 3 bubbles. Then, "More than I can count. Are you okay?" She considered how to answer. "I will be." "Old noise. I'm at the studio. Can I come by?" She held the phone and looked at the heron. The heron looked back with its amber eye. "Why do you want to?" "Because you texted me and you don't do that lightly." She sat down on her stool. "That's very perceptive of you. I pay attention to you. Are you going to answer the question?" She smiled despite everything. "Yes. You can come by." He arrived 40 minutes later with Thai food from a place she hadn't tried and the specific quality of presence that she'd come to understand was uniquely his. He walked in without ceremony, took in her face with one practiced look, and went to the work table to set out the food containers without making a production of any of it. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "I just thought you might not have eaten." She hadn't eaten. It was past 7. "My family situation is," she sat at the work table and accepted the container he held out. "Complicated would be understating it." "You don't have to." "I want to." She was slightly surprised to discover this was true. "I won a legal case recently. Financial abuse. My family, my mother and some others, had been using my finances and my credit for years. I documented it, filed, and won." He was still and quiet. "I cut off contact 3 months ago. It's the right thing. I know it's the right thing. But they don't." She stopped. Looked at her food. "They don't accept that it's over. And on bad days the sound of her number on my phone still makes me feel 12 years old." "That makes sense," he said. "Does it? You spent 12 years as a child being conditioned by those responses. That doesn't evaporate because you won in court. The brain is slower than the law." She looked at him. "You're surprisingly unplatitude. Why about this?" "I come from a family that was hard to leave," he said quietly. "Different circumstances. But I know the sound of a number you've had to stop answering." She sat back. He was looking at his food with a focused expression that she'd learned meant he was deciding something. "I have a brother," he said. "My only sibling. I haven't spoken to him in 4 years. He cost me. It doesn't matter what specifically. What matters is that I finally decided my peace was worth more than the guilt of the decision." He looked up. "It took 3 years for the guilt to stop feeling like a radio station I couldn't turn off. It'll take less time than that for you, I think." "Why less?" "Because you did the work of proving it. You didn't just leave, you documented, you built a case, you won. Your brain has the evidence. It'll catch up to you." She held his gaze for a moment. The studio was warm and dim around them. She'd turned off the overhead fluorescents and was working by the warmer workshop lights, which turned everything amber and close. "Drew." "Yeah, thank you for coming." He smiled, then a real one, not the almost version, and it was extraordinary. It reorganized his face entirely, softened the sculpture of it into something more human and more devastating for being human. "Thank you for letting me," he said. Chapter 9. The First Night. 6 weeks into their, whatever it was, she refused to name it, he finished moving into the house. He called her the morning after the movers left. "Will you come see the great room? I want to know what you think." "That's the commission visit. It's also a house I'd like you to see." A pause. "Both things." She drove out on a Saturday afternoon when the winter light was at its most honest, clear and slightly cold, the kind of light that showed you exactly what was there without any ornament. The house was better than the photographs. It sat on 3 acres of mixed hardwood and pine, and the great room was every bit of 15 feet high, with the wall of windows opening onto the woods exactly as advertised. The late afternoon sun came through the bare trees at a low angle and threw long shadows across the hardwood floors like drawn lines. She stood at those windows for a long time. "A tree," she said. "A tree? That wall, she turned and pointed to the east wall, the largest blank surface in the room, 12 feet wide and 14 tall. Not a forest. One tree. Iron, I think, with bronze leaf work. But not a literal tree, an impression of one. The way you think of a tree in winter, the structure of it without any softness. She turned back to the window. Because you look out there and you see the real trees. The piece on the wall has to be a conversation with what you see through the glass, not a competition. She could feel him behind her. Not touching, he never touched her without invitation. She'd noticed this, understood it as intentional, but present. That's exactly what this room needs, he said quietly. Exactly. She turned. He was closer than she'd calculated. She'd been so focused on the windows. And the late light was coming through the glass and landing on the side of his face, and he was looking at her with that expression she'd been cataloging for 6 weeks and still hadn't found a word for. Held, she thought. He was looking at her like something he was holding carefully. Zara. Her name in his voice. I know, she said. Tell me what you know. She held his gaze. The room was warm. He'd had the heating on all day before her arrival. She'd noticed that too, the temperature of a space prepared for a specific person's comfort. I know you're being careful with me, she said. I know you've been patient. I know you came to my studio with Thai food on a hard night and ate with me and told me about your brother and didn't push. She paused. I know what you are. Tell me what I am, he said quietly. Serious. The word arrived cleanly. You're serious. Yes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. She took one step toward him. Then another. He stayed perfectly still, holding his own ground, making no movement that could be mistaken for advance, while she crossed the 4 feet between them. She was 5 feet tall. Standing directly in front of him, the height difference was something she felt in her whole body, the way she'd have to reach up, the way he'd have to incline down. Usually height differences annoyed her. This one felt like architecture. Like something designed to be this way. She put her hand flat on his chest. Over his heart. She felt his breath change. I'm working on being okay, she said. I'm working on it every day. I have to be honest with you about that I'm not. Zara. His voice had dropped, and his hand came up to cover hers, not moving it, just there, the warmth of his palm over the back of her hand. I know where you are. I've been watching you. I know how far you've already come. His thumb moved, just barely, across her knuckles. I'm not asking you to be finished. What are you asking? To be here while you get there. She looked up at him, and the last of whatever she'd been bracing against softened, not collapsed, not surrendered, but released, the way a well-set joint releases heat when the weld finally takes. She rose onto her toes. He came down to meet her. The kiss was slow. He was slow in a way she hadn't expected. Given the size of him, the obvious wanting, he was slow, his mouth finding hers without rush, the warmth of him surrounding her without pressing, his free hand coming to the side of her face with a gentleness that was almost undoing. She felt the kiss in her spine. When it ended, she stayed where she was, her hand still on his chest, his still over hers. His forehead dropped to hers, the geometry of that, his 6'6" to her 5 feet, the careful folding down of him. Hi, he said quietly. She laughed, and, even to herself it sounded different, lighter, as if something had been set down. Hi, she said back. Part 4, Fire and Architecture. Chapter 10, By the Light of What She Made. The canopy installation at the headquarters building took 3 weeks. Drew came by almost every day, always at different times, never in a way that interfered. Sometimes he brought lunch. Sometimes he just stood in the lobby and watched her work, which she decided she didn't mind. There was something stabilizing about the quality of his attention, like working in a space where someone had correctly calculated the load-bearing requirements. Safe. Well-built. On the 4th day of installation, she was 20 feet up on a scaffold, attaching the suspension cables for the 3rd cluster of canopy elements, when she heard him come in below. Don't look down, she told him without turning. I wasn't going to. Yes, you were. Every time I'm up here you look up like you're calculating the probability of something going wrong. A pause. You're very perceptive. I'm a welder. Height is my job. Relax. I'm relaxed. Your voice is doing the controlled calm thing. Another pause. I'll work on it. She smiled at the cable she was attaching. Hand me the tension wrench? It's on the 2nd shelf of the cart. She heard him cross the lobby. The wrench appeared in her hand from below, exactly the right one, because she'd told him early on which tools were which, and he'd retained it perfectly. Tell me what it'll look like when it's done, he said. Come back when it's done. Tell me anyway. She worked the cable, letting the vision unspool as she spoke. Like sunrise interrupted. Like if you could freeze the exact moment between the first light and the full light and suspend it in the air so you could walk through it. She adjusted the tension. Each element is a different length and a different angle. From below they look like they're moving even though they're still. The skylight will do the rest. You're making a living thing, he said. I'm making an impression of one. What's the difference? She looked down at him, the upturned face, the patience. I've been thinking about that. Whether something made of iron can be alive. I think it can, he said simply. If it holds the memory of the making. She stared down at him. The Sheila Hicks book, he added. She says something like that. That woven work holds the body knowledge of the weaver. I think the same applies to welded work. You read the Sheila Hicks book? I sent it to you because I'd already read it. The almost smile. I thought you'd want to know you weren't alone in how you think about the work. She held the tension wrench and looked at him for a long moment, 20 feet of empty air between them, and felt something large and warm and slightly terrifying move through her chest. Drew, she said. Yeah, you are, she stopped. Started again. You are a genuinely surprising person. Good surprising or good, she said. Confusingly good. He tilted his head. The copper red of his skin in the skylight. The steadiness of him, even looking up at her from the lobby floor, even in the middle of a building full of scaffolding and exposed cable. The unmistakable sense of a person who had decided something and was simply, patiently, living in that decision. Come down for lunch when you're at a stopping point, he said. 20 minutes, she said. I'll wait. Of course he would, she thought. She turned back to the cable and worked with her hands and let herself, carefully, slowly, as if learning to walk on new ground, let herself feel the weight of what was growing between them. Not as a threat. Not as another thing that would cost her. As something being built. Correctly. With good materials and the right amount of heat. Chapter 11. What the Body Knows. The night the canopy installation was complete, she sent him a photo. She'd stayed after the crew left, alone in the dark lobby with just the building's night lighting, and climbed the scaffolding one last time to be in the piece. To hang in the middle of the suspended field of iron elements with the city coming through the skylights and the whole installation surrounding her, every piece she'd made with her own hands, the accumulated hours of it. She hung there for 20 minutes, just being in it. Then she climbed down and photographed it from the door, the long view, the full sweep of it from lobby floor to ceiling, the 63 elements catching the ambient light and holding it in 63 different ways. She sent it to Drew without text. He called. Come to the house, he said. His voice was different, rougher, the controlled quality slightly loosened. Please. It's late. I know. She went. He was at the door when she pulled into the drive, and she was halfway to thinking that he'd been watching for her headlights, that he'd been standing there waiting, when the door opened and the warm light came out and he was simply there, in the doorway. In a dark Henley and bare feet, and she walked toward him through the cold night air with her chest, doing something complicated. He held the door. She came through it. He closed it behind her. She turned, and he was right there, and she'd barely finished turning when his hands came to her face, both of them, cupping her jaw with the same deliberate gentleness as that first time. And he looked at her for a long moment with the expression she'd finally found a word for. Home, she thought. He was looking at her like she was somewhere he'd been trying to get to. The installation, he started. Later, she said. And she kissed him first this time. The sound he made was low and involuntary, and she felt it move through her from the point of contact downward. He wrapped around her. That was the only word for it, arms coming around her and lifting her without ceremony, without making a thing of it, simply resolving the architectural problem of their heights with his body. And she locked her arms around his neck, and for the first time in longer than she could calculate felt completely, structurally held. He carried her through the great room, past the east wall where her tree would eventually live, and she was aware of that, thought I made something for this room, and now I'm in it, and then he was setting her down on the edge of the bed in the room she'd never been in. And stepping back, she looked up at him in the dim light. Tell me, he said. Low. Careful. That voice vibrating in the wide chest. Tell you what. What you need right now. What feels right. He was still at a distance she couldn't cross from sitting. I want to be clear with you about what I want all of you, and I want to take my time with it, and I want to take direction from you on how this goes. Every step. She held his gaze. You like to direct. In most things. His voice had gone deeper. Tonight, I want to know what you want directed. The heat of that moved through her like the working temperature of a forge, that specific point where metal stops being cold and begins to be willing. Come here, she said. He crossed the space. Slower, she said when he reached her, and his hands went to her locks, gently, firmly, threading through them as he lowered himself to her level. And the warmth of his palm at the back of her head was the last measured thing before the warmth became heat and the heat became the kind of consuming, focused burn she only ever felt in the heart of her work. She had not expected the crying. Afterward, with her head on his chest and his arm a warm weight across her back and his heartbeat steadying under her ear, she felt the tears arrive without warning, quiet, not dramatic, not grief exactly, but something that lived next to grief. The body releasing what the mind had been too busy to let go. His arm tightened. I've got you, he said. Nothing else. No alarm, no performance of concern. Just the words and the certainty behind them. She cried for maybe 3 minutes. He held her for all of it. When she was finished, she lay very still and felt slightly mortified and slightly free. I'm not, she started. You don't have to explain it. I want to. She exhaled. I haven't let anyone. She stopped, tried again. I've been so careful. For so long. About who gets close and what that costs. And I forgot what it felt like to not be careful. He brought his hand to her locks, a slow stroke from crown to ends. You don't have to be careful here, he said. I want to be clear with you about that. Whatever you need to put it down here. I can hold it. She lifted her head and looked at him in the dark room. Drew. The name sitting in her mouth differently than it had 6 weeks ago. I need you to know that she searched. I'm working on trusting this. I believe you. And I'm also still learning that things can be this uncomplicated, he said quietly. She stared at him. Yes. I know. His thumb across her cheekbone. Take all the time you need to learn it. I'm not leaving. She laid her head back down. I'm not leaving. She turned the words over in the quiet. Felt for the fraudulent seam, the place where they'd split under pressure. Found nothing. The weld was clean. She fell asleep in his arms in the house she'd helped design a piece for, her locks spread across his chest, her breathing evening out against the sound of his heart, and for the first time and she could not remember how long, she slept without clenching. Part 5. What's Built to Last. Chapter 12. Ground Rules and Revelations. She didn't move in. She didn't intend to. But she had a toothbrush at his house within 2 months and a dedicated shelf in his garage for her studio overflow within 3, and she was not prepared to examine the implications of either. You're building yourself a harbor, her friend Kezia told her over wine on a Thursday night, back in Zara's apartment. Kezia was the kind of friend who told you true things in a tone that sounded like she was discussing the weather. You know that, right? It's a toothbrush. It's peace and you're calling it a toothbrush because you're afraid to say peace. Zara looked at her wine glass. He treats you like you're worth it, Kezia said, not unkindly. It's going to take a minute for your nervous system to believe that's real and not a setup. What if it is a setup? Then you'll handle it. But baby, look at your life right now. You've won your case. You've cut off the people who were taking from you. You've got a studio that's booked out and a man who showed up with Thai food on a bad night and didn't ask for anything. At some point you have to decide to believe the evidence in front of you. Zara said nothing. What does your gut say? Kezia asked. She thought about the quality of his silence when she needed to work. About the first edition book and the key card to the building and the careful, unhurried way he'd waited 6 weeks to kiss her. About I'm not leaving said in the dark. My gut says he's real, she admitted. Kezia raised her glass. Then drink your wine and get out of your own way. She talked to Drew about the family. Not all at once, it came out over several conversations, pieces of the story emerging as she became more certain that the floor would hold. He listened the way he did everything, fully, without rushing her toward a conclusion. The worst part, she said one evening, in his kitchen while he made dinner, and she sat on the counter because she liked the height advantage, wasn't the money. I mean, the money was a lot. But the worst part was what happened to my sense of what was normal. She watched him move around the kitchen with his characteristic, unhurried competence. I genuinely didn't know for years that what was happening to me wasn't just family. Wasn't just what you owe the people who raised you. When did you know? My accountant. She smiled slightly. I hired an accountant when my income got complicated enough, and she looked at my credit history and looked at my face and said, "Honey, this is not normal." She shook her head. It took a stranger with a spreadsheet to say out loud what I'd been feeling for 14 years. He was quiet while he plated the food, salmon, roasted vegetables, the kind of meal that was nutritious in a way she recognized as care disguised as dinner. I want to ask you something, he said, setting her plate in front of her. And I want you to know you don't have to answer. Ask. Are you still in therapy? She looked at him. You know I'm in therapy? You mentioned Dr. Reeves once in September. It wasn't. I just remembered it. It seemed important. Yes, she said. Every week. She considered. She's the one who helped me understand that cutting them off wasn't cruelty. That maintaining a boundary isn't abandonment. He nodded once. Sat across from her. Good, he said simply. I'm glad you have that. She watched him pick up his fork. Most men would feel some kind of way about their girlfriend being in weekly therapy. The word girlfriend landed between them. She hadn't used it before. He looked up from his plate, and the almost smile was the real smile, and it was still extraordinary. I have my own therapist, he said. He has thoughts about my control tendencies. She burst out laughing. What? He was mock offended, and she could see him enjoying her laugh the way he always did, like it was a specific thing he was collecting. Control tendencies, she managed. Yes. I've observed 1 or 2 of those. 2, maximum. Drew. You organized my tool cart in my own studio while I was on scaffold. The T-bar square was in the wrong section. It was my studio. You agreed with me afterward that it was in the wrong section. That's not the point. She was laughing properly now, full and unguarded, and she watched it do what it always did to his face, the opening, the warmth, the unconcealed delight. He reached across the table and took her hand. She let him. She was letting him do that more easily now, the reaching, the holding, the persistent, gentle declarations. Her nervous system was updating its assessment. Slowly but updating. Zara, he said. I know, she said again. I love you. He said it simply. Clearly. Without preamble. I know it's early by some measures, and I don't need you to say it back. I just want you to know it's true, and I want to be honest with you. She looked at him across the kitchen table, their dinner going slightly cool, his hand warm around hers. She thought about what it would have meant to hear those words before. The conditions attached to them. The interest rate. Okay, she said. He tilted his head. I'm going to let that be real, she said carefully. I'm going to let it just land. Without waiting for the catch. She turned her hand over so their fingers interlaced. That's new for me. Give me a minute with it. Take all the minutes, he said. She sat in it. The kitchen was warm. The food smelled good. His hand was real and warm and right there. Okay, she said again, quieter. Yeah, okay. He squeezed her hand and let go. Eat your dinner, he said. She picked up her fork, and she was smiling, and she didn't try to stop it. Chapter 13. Forge work. 3 months after the canopy installation, the lobby was open to the public and a photograph of it ran in Architectural Digest. She found out from her phone blowing up at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The photo was extraordinary. Someone had shot it from the mezzanine level at the precise moment of peak morning light, the installation fully ignited by the skylight, the 63 elements suspended in their moving stillness. The caption read, "Canopy installation by Atlanta artist ZARA Henderson, James Security Group Headquarters, Buckhead." And then, below that, a quote she hadn't given them, Drew must have, she realized. Her words, from a conversation she barely remembered. Art should do something a wall can't. It should make you stop and actually look. She called him before she'd gotten out of bed. "You talked to Architectural Digest. I suggested they speak to the building's facilities manager, who may have provided them your name and a copy of your artist statement." Drew, the photo is stunning. You should see it. I've seen it. Everyone I've ever met is texting me. She pressed her free hand over her eyes. You can't orchestrate coverage for me without telling me. Would you have agreed to it if I'd asked? That's not. Zara. A pause. I would have said I'd think about it, she admitted. And probably no. Because. She dropped her hand from her eyes. The morning light was coming through her apartment windows. Because I would have felt like she stopped. Like it was something I got because of you instead of because of the work. The photo is of the work, he said quietly. The work got the coverage. I just made sure the right person saw it. She was silent. I know that's a line, he continued. I know you need the success to be yours and I respect that completely. If I crossed it, tell me and I won't do it again. She thought about the line. Where it was and whether he'd crossed it. The work is good, she said finally. The work is extraordinary. So maybe it would have gotten there on its own. Maybe, he said. But you've been giving everything to everyone your entire life. Someone working in your corner doesn't diminish what you're building. It's just someone in your corner. She stared at the ceiling of her apartment. The locks were spread across her pillow. The morning was doing what mornings did. Her phone was still vibrating with notifications from the AD article. Okay, she said. Yeah, come over. Bring breakfast. I'm going to be very gracious about this, and I need pancakes to do it. She heard the low rumble of his laugh, rarely deployed, devastating when it appeared. 20 minutes, he said. Chapter 14, The Tree. The tree went up in March. She built it over 2 months in the studio, the main trunk in iron, 12 feet tall, the branches spreading in open gestures that suggested reaching without being literal. The bronze leaf work she'd imagined took longer than expected because she couldn't get the thinness right until she developed a new technique, a process she ended up documenting and which would eventually lead to a teaching residency offer she hadn't anticipated. Drew came to the studio on the day she finished welding the final branches. She didn't know he was coming. She was in full gear, helmet, heavy gloves, the torch singing in her hands, when she felt the shift in the studio air that meant the door had opened. She finished the bead she was running and killed the torch and lifted her helmet to find him standing 20 feet away, watching. You're not supposed to be in here without safety glasses, she said. He produced them from his breast pocket and put them on. She looked at him in the safety glasses, this enormous, copper-toned, impossibly beautiful man in a fitted coat and proper safety glasses, and felt a ridiculous rush of affection. Come look at it, she said. He came around to stand beside her, and they both looked at the tree. In the studio light, it was almost alive. The iron trunk held the history of its making, every pass of the torch, every persuasion of the metal, the accumulated heat of weeks. The bronze leaves caught the light differently from every angle. It was, she thought with the particular calm of a person whose work has come out right, exactly what she'd meant to make. It's a conversation, he said quietly. Yeah, with the woods outside the window. With everything outside the window. Everything real. She tilted her head at the piece. The house already has the concrete and the clean lines. This is the counterweight. The thing that says, but here is also complexity. Here is also something that grew. He turned to look at her with the expression she knew now as well as she knew the contours of her own work. Zara, he said. Yes, she said. He blinked. I love you too, she said. I've been wanting to say it for a while and she stopped. Laughed slightly at herself. I keep second-guessing whether I mean it enough, which is silly because I've never second-guessed whether I meant anything in my work and this is, she gestured between them somewhat helplessly. This is the same category. He was very still. This is the work, she said. You're the work I chose. And I don't do that lightly. He closed the distance between them in 2 unhurried steps and put his arms around her, still in her welding gear, torch residue on her gloves and probably her face, her locks tied back under the bandana she wore when she worked, and held her the way he had that first night. Complete. Structural. Like something that had been engineered to hold. She pressed her face into the wide chest and felt the rumble of his voice when he spoke without hearing the words, which was all right because she knew what they were. She'd always known. She had just needed time to let the knowing be safe. Epilogue, the opening. The studio opening was in April. Not the studio itself, that had been open for months. This was the official launch, a proper event, invitations, a photographer, pieces by 3 other artists she'd been mentoring alongside her own work. She'd rented the space next door and knocked through a doorway and covered the exposed brick in the new room with her sketches. Drew was there, but not in a way that announced his presence. She saw him across the room twice in the first hour, talking to people she didn't know easily, naturally, with that quality he had of making whoever he was talking to feel like the only person in the room. He was wearing something dark and fitted and perfect. His bald head caught the warm gallery lighting. He was also, she noticed, talking to the art critic from Atlanta magazine. She made her way to him during a lull. "What are you telling him?" she asked under her breath. "That the iron forest piece in the corner is not for sale," he said, not looking at her. She looked at the iron forest section she'd reinstalled for the event, a smaller version of the Pemberton piece. "I know it's not for sale." So did he. Now he's going to write about why it's not for sale, which is more interesting than writing about its price. He glanced down at her then, and the almost smile was the real one. "Your dress is beautiful." She was wearing deep burgundy, a structured wrap dress that set against the copper of her skin like a forge fire. The locks were down and loose, a few pinned back with the copper feather clip. "You got that critic here," she said. "I mentioned the opening to him. He chose to come." A very slight pause. "And I may have also mentioned that the woman who made the Architectural Digest installation was showing new work. Drew, you are building something real." His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "And I am absolutely going to make sure the right people see it. That's non-negotiable. You can be irritated with me for 30 minutes after the event." She held his gaze. The studio was full of people she'd invited, friends, fellow artists, some clients, Kezia in a spectacular green dress in the corner talking to the other artist's gallery rep, warm light. Her work on the walls and the floors and the air. Her name on the lease and her credit healthy and her case closed and her phone with the contact blocked that needed blocking. "You are building something real." She turned to face the room fully, his arm moving to her back, a light, easy weight, present without confining. 30 minutes, she said. "Fair. Starting now." Starting now. She looked at the room. Her room. Her opening. Her work, her name, her life assembled from choices she'd made with her own hands and her own name with no one else's signature on the account. And beside her, steady and warm and radiating the particular heat of a person who had decided, simply, and had not wavered, Drew. The heron stood by the window, amber eye catching the light. The tree waited at a house in the woods for the morning sun to come through the windows and begin its conversation. The canopy hung downtown, igniting every morning when the skylight found it, making 63 individual pieces of iron move without moving. All of it was hers. She let that be true. She let it land in her body and stay there, the way she'd been learning to let good things land, without bracing, without waiting for the catch, without the old exhausting vigilance. She breathed in. The room glowed. This, she thought, is what winning actually feels like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not the trumpets she'd expected. Just warm and solid and hers, with room for more. For every person who documented the truth, held the line, and found that on the other side of the hardest decision, life was waiting, arms open, sunlight coming through tall windows. You did the work. Now rest. The